As we sit, the ceasefire has officially ended, characterized by renewed bombing campaigns by Israel. We're sitting at some areas. I'll get you the details of where those areas are very shortly. That has come under incessant attack in the early hours of this morning. So the little bit of a reprieve, little under a week that Palestinians in Gaza has had, is completed in the sense that the bombing campaign certainly has resumed. And the past 2 months have certainly shown people from different backgrounds, certainly that can unite in solidarity for a common goal. In this case, the liberation of Palestine, and in several figures like Reverend Ellen Busak, Mandla Mandela, and others have spearheaded the demonstrations and galvanized activists in this part of the world. But there are also youth that are taking up the baton. One of them, the South African Jews for a Free Palestine. He is Jamie Rosengarten. He is in studio with me this morning. Jamie, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time.
Morning. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all your listeners for tuning in this morning.
What are your thoughts right now? Of course, we have a ceasefire that was there for a short bit to allow for aid to move in, for fuel to get in, some medical supplies, including the release, of course, of prisoners of war and hostages, etc. And there was a hope, I think a little bit of a hope, that with every passing day when there was an extension of a truce, that there would be some sort of a ceasefire. That clearly has not happened, as Israel has indicated. It was itching to go back to start bombing again. We'll get into the complexities of all the other stuff very, very shortly, but just your thoughts as we resume now the bombing campaign.
Well, actually, on the way to the studio, I became quite emotional because beforehand I was just quite nervous about the interview, and I was thinking about that. And then I started going on my phone and looking through social media and the news, and just seeing this start again. It does put a lot of those feelings of anxiety into perspective and shows the importance of, trying to vocalize one's disdain for what's happening. And yeah, I think the thing with the ceasefire is that we did always know that it would be fleeting. So I think the important thing that this reminds us now is now's the moment we really need to intensify our vocal calls and our activism and our organization, because the only way that the ceasefire will be more permanent is if there is international pressure.
Absolutely. And you sit here, of course, as a person of Jewish faith, correct?
Yes.
And look, I think much like with Muslims, there's always been a contestation of narratives. We needed to come out as Muslims to say, yeah, but ISIS don't represent us, and they're not of our ilk, and those sorts of things, and we don't believe in a caliphate, at least according to how they had tried to document, or how to try to structure it, and I think that's pretty much the same for people of your faith. That there's a perception that Jews are raised believing that Zionism and Judaism are the same thing, which of course one is a political program, one is a faith. What was your upbringing that led you to where you are right now?
Well, I think like many, or perhaps most Jewish South African or Jewish people, I was raised to some extent as a Zionist. I remember when I was about 15, I heard the word Zionist and I went to my parents because I didn't actually know what this meant. I just had some vague understanding that if you're Jewish, you're a Zionist. And I asked them what it meant to be a Zionist, and they also provided some vague answer. If you're Jewish, you're a Zionist. But I guess it just takes, once one starts looking at information, and I think the point to emphasize here is, as you say, this isn't a religious issue. This is a political issue, and the disagreement also isn't factual in nature. It's moral in nature. One starts reading the facts and learning the history. The material reality is undeniable. How one feels and responds to that might different. But I think, firstly, as a Jew and the values I learned as a Jew, but secondly, just as a human being, it was my imperative, my moral imperative, to denounce that vociferously in every form, and also to wholly dissociate my religion, which is a religion of life, it is a religion of peace, away from the settler colonial violent project.
Yeah. When did that happen for you?
I've been actually in the last few days trying to sit down and work out when that exact process was. I know when I was 15, I was still to some extent a Zionist. By the time I was 17, I had managed to I would consider myself an anti-Zionist. The 6 years, I'm 23 now, so the 6 years between that has definitely been a journey of unlearning Zionism. And I think it fundamentally is an unlearning, and this unlearning is possible, and because when you are a Zionist, you've been raised in a myopic bubble, and it does require you to fundamentally alter your whole perception of reality, which is a process that takes time. But I think it's a very easy process because one only needs to be consistent to their values.
And where did that Damascus moment start in terms of, okay, you explained to me sort of your age and thinking in 15, 17 when you were asking these questions. But did you find that in asking these questions that it put you in conflict with your faith, and whether you belonged, in the community, a part of that community that fundamentally believe that, being Jewish is also being a Zionist?
So I think when it started was when I was 15, I actually went to Israel. And I think that was the moment which started this journey. Because when you're actually in Israel, as much as it will be much more segregated than even apartheid South Africa, there is something dystopian about that society, walking around and seeing that much surveillance and that many guns. Then you enter the old city of Jerusalem, and you can just see the notable difference when you're entering the Muslim and the Jewish part. So I think after coming back from that trip, I was definitely deeply disturbed, and I was told that this was something I was going to love. I was returning to my homeland, but my reality on the ground there was very different. My reality on the ground there was of a segregated city and of an apartheid. So that's what started the journey, I think.
And does that journey extend to, because look, I mean, I think in various religious texts and so on, we read them through sometimes a historical lens, and we look at how they are applicable now and what lessons we can certainly draw from them. And I mean, an example of how I believe the faith is in part being captured, by the political establishment, in Israel at the moment, is, for instance, the invoking of Amalek, and how to understand what certainly in part scripture says and depicts, and how this is twisted and abused to advance a political goal. And in this instance, of course, it is the annihilation of Palestinians, with the extent of establishing, I suppose a Jewish state or a Jewish home that extends way into Jordan, way into Lebanon, etc. And we see the sort of invoking of Amalek and others. And I've spoken to people like Professor Stephen Friedman and others about what this means and so on. But reading that, did it ever put you in conflict in some way? Like, this is what my faith says, but am I? Because I look at these documentaries on Al Jazeera and elsewhere, where there are young people like yourself that are living there in the kibbutzes and elsewhere that believe that I can kill you because this is my land, it's my God-gifted land. There was a stabbing of a Palestinian pregnant mother yesterday that was so absolutely tragic. And there are those that are, of course, I think very full well knowing that they are hijacking the faith for political ambitions and for their own particular needs and so on. But there are those that fundamentally believe their faith sanctions what's happening right now. What is that observation that you've had?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And for myself personally, it hasn't been a conflict of faith so much as a conflict within community. And by that, I mean, when growing up, I was taught that the fundamental value, if you had to reduce Judaism to a nutshell, it was the preservation of human life. All life is sacred, and one needs to endeavor actively to protect that. Feeding into that were ideas of tikkun olam, or like trying to do good for the world and society around you. So Judaism was always it provided quite a moral or ethical basis in which to refer to. So I didn't have, I guess, any religious confrontations, because when I started to, I guess, just learn about history, what I was seeing was quite noticeably not representative of my religion. It was quite noticeably a perversion, and a cheap perversion at that. And there's many examples, as you've pointed out, where you could see that. You could also see how within a week you've got Israeli Independence Day, followed by, firstly you've got the Holocaust Day, then the National Day for Soldiers, then Israeli Independence Day. the Holocaust Day celebrated in Israel is celebrated at a different date anywhere else in the world. So there's deep pain. I'd see deep pain when the Magen David, a religious icon, is cheapened and thrown onto a flag to be hoisted above settlements. So I think the point to emphasize there is that, and from going to Israel, there was never a moment where this was representative to Judaism to me. And I think people know that this conflation between the two, I think it's often quite disingenuous. And I say that, why I say I haven't had conflict in terms of my religion, I've had conflict in terms of my community, is what a lot of Zionists do is, as soon as you have Jewish voices who are speaking out against the settler colonial project, they will try individualize them, they will try atomize them, and they will try scare them into silence. And that's also, it's crucial to the political project.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah, it's very much happened to me, and it's happened to most of the people, I guess, in my community. And although I've been an anti-Zionist for half a decade now, it's taken about 6 years to get to the level of comfortability where I'm comfortable to go on radio and speak out without fearing what the potential repercussions on me personally, professionally, familiarly, and all of those things. But I think that's also why it's important to speak out.
Absolutely. We're talking to Jamie Rosengarten. He is from the South African Jews for a Free Palestine. You're welcome to use the WhatsApp line on 0786 10 11 12. It is Radio 786 on 100.4 FM. So how do you feel when somebody, though, does call you a self-hating Jew?
So, yeah, there were many years where I really struggled with that, and I think Zionists can be incredibly mean and cruel and violent. And also to emphasize, throughout this period I was a child. I'm only 23 now. So it was quite abrasive when you would have grown adults calling you, swearing at you, telling you they wanted to spit on you, self-hating Jew, a capo, and other things I think would be inappropriate to repeat on the radio. So this definitely had a significant toll on me. At this point, although it sometimes does still hurt me, it often does fuel me on, in a sense that when if someone who's saying a lot of vile things beforehand is then calling you a self-hating Jew, it does in a sense indicate that I'm doing something right. And I'll give an example of that is last week there was a picket outside Cape Union Mart. This was immediately after Mohammed Abbasi from Gift of the Givers had just been murdered. And we were chanting, "Long live Gift of the Givers, long live Abbasi." And a Zionist was filming us for 3 hours, and when we chanted that, would laugh and say, "How many times did he die?" and make really abusive comments. And in the moments shortly after that, that person called me a self-hating Jew. So in that context, when someone is taking glee in a Gift of the Givers worker who's died, when they are saying, "I'm not representing Judaism," that does, now it's at the stage where that does fuel me on, and it says I'm obviously doing something right.
But there's a deep sense of hatred that I get that I see from these Zionists that it's not that they just struggle to defend the morally indefensible, but the tone, the "we'll spit on you," the "you are this, you are that." I was watching a video in which one of the settlers was saying, "We killed your Jesus and we'll kill you, and your Jesus can come lick my backside." Sorry about that very vile description, but I want to drive home the point of what is a very spirited expression of hate. Where does that come from?
Well, I think that's such a great question, because believe any forms of hate, it's fundamentally fear. And that's what Zionism as a political project is trying to drive in Judaism, in Jews, is this idea of constantly needing to be fearful. And as South Africans, I think this is a point really to emphasize, because the very idea of Zionism, it's basically saying that the only way for Jews to be safe, the only way for Jews to be prosper, is if they are separate from everyone else, if they have their own little enclave, if Palestinians can't enter that. And that's a very fearful position, and it's very insidious, because A, what does it say about Palestinians? But B, what is it saying about Jewish people? If the idea that the only way Jewish people can be safe and flourish and prosperous is if they are on their own, if they are in their enclave, if they can't live in community. And I think that idea is fundamentally stemming from a fear, that Zionism is making Jewish people scared to be in community, and there's something just deeply perverse and deeply uncomfortable about that.
Does it make you feel apprehensive to go to synagogue?
Yeah, which has been a deeply thing I've really grappled with, is that most formal Jewish institutions in this country have been co-opted by a political project, which is Zionism. That I think there's not many, if you wanted to Magai or convert to Judaism, as far as I'm aware, most shuls in South Africa do require you to pledge your commitment to Israel. So Judaism was always a very important thing to me. But then I started not wanting to go into these formal institutions because they would be espousing, the religious figures who were supposedly there to represent me would be espousing ideas which would fundamentally I would disagree with. Yeah. So because of that, what South African Jews for a Free Palestine is doing currently is we're organizing our own Shabbat services and our own alternative things. And the point to emphasize is that when I initially started being an anti-Zionist, we were very individualized, we were very atomized groups, but as an organization, there now is a significant Jewish constituency in South Africa who is saying not in my name, who is organizing community, who is getting together, and I've found that incredibly hopeful and exciting to be amongst.
Do you think there's a growing number of voices like yourself, particularly young ones? Because we've had several coverage on this numerous occasions, but I hear about what's happening at Herzliya. I hear the type of propaganda that is happening, the singing of the Israeli anthem, which is, if that's a secular country, why the anthem is being sung, I don't really know. But there is what appears to be a strong level of indoctrination that's happening at the moment.
Yeah, so I think there's 100% a growing constituency. Our movement in the last 2 months and still is continuously expanding and growing and getting more numbers. And that's really exciting. And I think it will continue to carry on in that trajectory, especially because young, born-free South Africans know quite well what an apartheid is and what it means to live in a democracy. So I do think that voice will grow. However, as you point out, it's incredibly difficult because the amount of power and funding which is going into the Zionist lobby is immense. And there's something, a lot of it is deeply disturbing. You pointed out Herzliya. And I think, it's a really crucial point to bring about because Jewish South Africans fundamentally deserve to have a fair and equal education, where they are able to, like all South Africans, where they are able to learn a history and learn about the world in a way which isn't deeply mediated through externally controlled senses. And I say that a few years ago, 2 Herzliya students kneeled during the Israeli national anthem and faced extreme backlash and punishment from the school. And South African citizens in a democracy now, including Jewish South Africans, deserve to have the opportunity to express themselves in their fullest and to have a fair education.
Absolutely. It's 21 minutes after 8 o'clock. It's NRAN Radio 786. A very good morning to you. Jamie Rosengarten is in studio with us. He's from South African Jews for a Free Palestine. You're welcome to drop us a WhatsApp on 0786 10 11 12. A question about what does that commitment look like when he says a pledge of allegiance to the state of Israel?
Well, look, I didn't go to Herzliya myself, so I can't answer to what that actually looks like. But I do know that it's significant that Herzliya's headmaster and many of their board are openly in interviews openly encourage Zionism and encourage a lot of those students immediately after matric to move to Israel and to join the IDF. And there is something, again, I'm saying this a lot, I've said deeply disturbing, I think 5 times already in the interview. But as a born-free South African, I am incredibly lucky that I could live in South Africa, have a good life as an equal amongst people. I find that something deeply disturbing that I know students, people my age who I have known and who I've often grown up alongside, seeing these people now going off to fight in a foreign army risking their lives. They very well might die just so that they could kill. And the fact that we have institutions in this country which are encouraging our youth to do that, are encouraging our youth to go to a foreign land to die, to kill, there's just something which is deeply, something really needs to be done fundamentally.
Yeah. On the WhatsApp line, Assalamu alaikum to Shariq, Shalom, Jamie. Thank you for putting us into perspective. I think it's about time that a concerted effort must be made to get people of the Jewish and Muslim faith together, as well as other denominations. We all worship one God, and peace between us will all definitely be the answer, inshallah. It's time, says that WhatsApp in on 0786 10 11 12. A question about, in your view, why there appears to be so little support from people in the Christian faith. And look, I mean, I don't want to suggest that people, while I'm reading a WhatsApp, but I want to just add a proviso to that question, that people of the Christian or Jewish faith or Muslim faith, as we now know, are not all one homogeneous group. There are people with different perspectives in those bodies of faith. And what is quite evident is that even the church with its various denominations are all equally divided about how they perceive and see this. And there are Christian Zionists, etc., as well, that exist in this part of the world, the ACDP and others, that politically espouse that. Is there an overlap and a confluence between the Jewish Zionists in this part of the world and those Christian Zionists? And are they singing largely from the same hymn sheet?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think first thing to point out is, as you say, that it's not an homogenous voice, that right now you've got Father Michael Weeder in the Anglican Church, Reverend Alan Bussack, who vocally being critical of Israel. And for example, Michael Weeder is running at St. George's Cathedral every Wednesday. He's running a service for Palestine if anyone has the time to go through. But I do think it's very crucial that we start looking at Christian Zionism, and particularly evangelical Christian Zionism, because I think I read recently that currently there's more Christian Zionists in the world than Jewish Zionists, and this is a thing which I think discourse hasn't necessarily caught up to. In the South African context, these people are definitely very imbricated, but I think the thing one should start looking at is that a lot of these Zionist organizations at the moment are actively mobilizing now in working class and poor areas across Cape Town. They are providing funds to these communities, they're providing material support, and they are trying to, I guess, materially incentivize people into supporting the political project, Christian people into supporting the political project of Zionism. So I think that's a critical point that needs to really start being looking at, is this idea of Christian Zionism, but also just the fund that in terms of South Africa, the funding which is going into, I know Mitchell's Plain, for example, there are church communities there which are receiving funding from South African Friends of Israel. So these are interesting things, I guess, to consider.
Well, that's a bombshell. I saw the demonstrations there in Mitchell's Plain, people standing on corners with placards. But you're saying that there are these lobby groups that are actually funding and pumping money into... are they buying support or are they amplifying support?
Well, look, I don't have enough of the actual details to provide very accurate things, but I know that every Friday outside Parliament there is a group of Christian Zionists who protest with their flags. They are coming predominantly from a church community within, I think, the Mitchell's Plain area. And it just takes a bit of research to see that I think it's the South African Friends of Israel and other organizations have supported these communities. So the extent of, I guess, the relations are unknown. But every Friday there is this protest, and every Friday there's an affirmation that there is a connection, at least.
A couple of WhatsApp messages in as the time moves on to 26 minutes after 8 o'clock. It's NRA on Radio 786. Megan, don't know if you know Megan, from the South African Jewish, South African Jewish Friends.
South African Jews for Free Palestine.
Yeah, she said, I just want to thank Jamie for articulating what we think and feel. Ours is an incredibly rational point of view, and it is heartwarming to hear it on Radio 786. Another one saying, great discussion. You are a brave young man, Jamie. Jamie. Thank you for giving us a clear voice. Assalamu alaikum, shalom. What a brave young man, says that one there. And countries around the world must expel Zionists and place them, where they can. I'm going to leave that there. I salute your bravery. Thank you, Jamie, says that one in there. On 0786 10 11 12. 27 minutes after 8 o'clock. How does your family feel about your position? You spoke about when you were 15 and you were asking them the question, what is a Zionist? And, they sort of tried to mix the two. And if that's what I understood correctly, what you said. Today, how do they see it?
Yeah, I guess it's been it's a difficult period with them. And I won't go into them just for them that. I won't go into them too much. But what I will say is that everybody's unlearning Zionism is a journey, and it takes time, and we're at different stages in that journey. So my family is further behind in that journey than I have. So for a number of years, I've been trying to push them in that right direction, and I've been hopeful that has been the case. I guess in this period, naturally, when fear is heightened, the reaction is to be close-minded, to close in on oneself, to get, I guess, more irrational and hateful. So there has been elements of that. So in this last period, it's been incredibly emotionally difficult. Haven't really been able to speak to them, not even out of a principled position. Just when I have been talking to them, I have a knot in my stomach, that these are people who I really love and fundamentally people who've instilled me with the values I had today. My activism is stemming, amongst other people, my activism stemming from my family. So it has always been deeply distraught when you would see this complete cognitive dissonance on this area where all their values would kind of, they would be missing in this area. So at the moment, it's been a very emotional time. I get a knot in my stomach when engaging with them. But at the same time, I just like for most Zionist people, I am passionately hopeful, and I know fundamentally that this is a project which can be unlearned. And the other point I want to emphasize is unlearning Zionism is not just good for Palestinian people, it is liberatory for yourself, For unlearning Zionism is incredibly beneficial for the Jewish people, being able to collectively and individually deal with our fear and embrace community and embrace values of tikkun olam and of justice and of life is an incredibly liberatory thing. Yeah. So, I very much hope more people do it.
I think it was, what's her name? Maggie Kuhn from America, the activist that was part of the Grey Panthers movement that said that speak the truth even if your voice shakes. And that's a little bit of what I'm getting from you right now, that it is a very brave thing to do, to introspect firstly with yourself and to deal with those bias that you may have learnt through the years. And then, of course, to look at it from the perspective of your own family, your own community, then of course your own faith as well, and wondering whether you're on the right side of history, those sorts of things. I'm certain that those are questions that confronts you routinely. I want to understand though, because we're running tight with time, and I want to shift the conversation a little bit to how people like yourself envisage what is the solution to this. And I want to preface the question by saying that, look, fundamentally, it is for Palestinians and people that live there to decide what that future is going to be. There was at some stage talk about a two-state solution, and the debate was along which borders, 1967, before 1967. And if you go 1967, do you negate what has happened in 1948? And around about that time when there was a British project, and then there was the movement of people that, yes, had a very raw deal, in Germany and elsewhere in Poland, that had moved to essentially into a place where people had already been living. And that led to the formation and the creation of what, as you put it, the entity that is called Israel today. The complexity of all of this, of course, is that, yes, while there are very many white Europeans and others that have moved to Israel, as it is claimed to be known, today that for some of them, they have to leave and go back to where they came from, but there are those that have now for a couple of years started to live there. There are generations that are born there as well on that particular land. And so when we talk about what we believe to be the future, does it extend itself in some way or the other about a conversation about whether Israel has a right to exist or not?
Well, I think it very much fundamentally gets there. And in terms of what we need for the future, I think I always go back to the bell hooks quote, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." So when I call for a free Palestine from the river to the sea, what that call is evoking, it's not a call to reproduce cycles of violence. It's not a call to recreate a form of displacement and seeing Jewish people evicted from their land. When we're calling for a free Palestine, what we are calling for is an equal society where all people, regardless of denomination, belief or whatnot, can live as equals. It sounds, saying this idea, it's bizarre that this is often framed as a radical idea. This pursuit of a one-state solution is framed as like this very radical pursuit, where fundamentally what it's just insisting is that all people live as equals. And I think the other point to mention there is that as South Africans, we rarely know the possibility of freedom dreaming. That in this country, at a moment, it seemed like the idea of a unified South Africa would be impossible. There were many people calling for, that divided thing, and that did seem impossible until it happened. But also when we are looking at South Africa, the exciting thing with Palestine is that as much as South Africa did well in our transition, as we obviously know, there's a lot of things that got wrong and a lot of things that Palestine can learn from us. And I think that's fundamentally, important that when I envision a free Palestine, it is a Palestine which learns from South Africa. It is a Palestine which embodies the Cornel West quote that love is what justice is what love looks like in public. And it's just the point to emphasize though is that when we call for a free Palestine, the call is not to reproduce structural violence. It is to dismantle the master's house and the master's tools.
Absolutely. Let me go through the WhatsApp line very quickly. Thank you, Jamie, for your bravery. Do you find journalists like Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal, Finkelstein, etc. made an impact on your journey?
Yeah, definitely. Norman Finkelstein in particular was, and it's been very exciting, I guess, having vocal voices like that is always an affirmation that even if you know that you've got an uncomfortability in your stomach, you know that something feels wrong, just having people in positions of authority affirming the same points definitely does set one in the right direction. A bit
of an awkward question. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to ask this question, but let me put it to you, right? A question to your guest. I respect the stance that you are taking with regards to the Palestinian cause, but how do we know that you're genuine and not just instituting a measure of self-preservation? I don't know what that quite means, but this is the question. I'm truly not being skeptical about you, but I've been wanting to ask this question to people of Jewish faith supporting the cause. Seeing that you are a minority in this country, I really do not mean any offense with my question. I'm just curious. And the reminder of the question is, how do we know that you're genuine and not just instituting a measure of self-preservation?
No, thank you. That's actually a very great question to raise, because I think a point I'd wanted to make is that in all of these spaces, because I am Jewish, I am much more visible. So I'm doing many of the same things that hundreds or thousands of other people are doing it. But just because I'm a white Jew who's doing these things, I will get a lot more visibility, I will get a lot more praise, I'll get a lot more clout from doing that. So I think it's an important thing to address. And I guess fundamentally, there's nothing I could say which would be able to affirm that. But as I perceive it is that just as I'm getting this heightened visibility, it's because I've got a heightened level of power, and that
agency.
Yeah, agency and power, and that my voice will carry certain weight, So I think when one has power, one needs to actually use it and harness it and instrumentalize it in a progressive direction, and in a direction which is helping what other people are wanting. So in this, I don't want my voice to be all assuming. I don't want it to be setting a trajectory or leading the way. I am just I've come to movements with a desire to help and provide support where I can, And I will continue to be on the ground and going to protests and just trying to provide support where I can. But I don't want that. I've got no hopes or pretenses of wanting to control what the trajectory of the movement.
The same listener saying thank you and we appreciate you. Another listener saying that your eloquence is amazing for a young man. Assalamu alaikum and shalom. Really appreciate this interview. Our heart goes out to the brother in studio. Thank you and may you be blessed in abundance. Your activism shines rays of hope for more people seeing the truth from Zionism. Says that one in there. 0786 10 11 12. Good morning, Jamie. You're standing up for the truth and justice is what all of God's prophets stood for. All of God's prophets were activists. This is what the Quran also encourages. There are very many non-Zionist Jews around the world. With your understanding, says that one in there on 0786 10 11 12. The entire Muslim community in Cape Town is also your family, Jamie, with a blushed emoji saying
I actually want to say on that point that in this period that recently the South African Jewish Report published a piece saying that Jewish South Africans are very scared at the moment, and there's this anxiety, again, as I spoke earlier about fear. In my experience, I've never, since engaging more with the Muslim community across Cape Town and many others in the Palestinian solidarity community, I've never experienced such love, generosity, and warmth of spirit in these last 2 months, and that's the point I would want to emphasize for, if there are other Jewish people listening to this, is that the love you will receive in these spaces and just how happy and eagerly you will be embraced and received by people has truly been gobsmacking,
Absolutely,
so I've really appreciated that.
Assalamu alaikum all. Shalom, Jamie. Toda Rabba. I don't know what that means, but what a refreshing Jewish young man. Correct about the sponsoring. There's a church in Belhar that is also being financed by the Zionist entity. The Israeli flag hangs high in this church. It says this WhatsApp in on 0786 10 11 12. I'll go through some more very, very shortly. There's a lot of them coming in, of absolute praise and awe for not only the fact that you, I suppose you've done the introspection and you are having the very difficult conversations within your own community, but also that you are a young 23-year-old very wise young man, that people are celebrating here on the WhatsApp line. What goes through your mind when you saw these videos of the prisoners of war being released? The otherwise called hostages, certainly, that by the Palestinian resistance. They look like they went on some sort of a nice trip where they were away for some time, and they had a really great time. And when they leave, they seem almost a little bit sad or nostalgic to leave, and the way in which they interact supposedly with their captors, that was described by the Israeli defense minister as human animals is the phrase that he used, and if one looks at the contrast between the political prisoners that are being released by Israel, they speak about not having eaten, they speak about having not had water, the beatings that are happening, the level of torture that's taking place, compared to what we're seeing for everybody. And I mean, some of them, it's not just, I thought, look, there could be a counterclaim to say that, this is all being done for cameras and so on and so forth, but a lot of them have come out to say they don't even want to meet, for instance, Benjamin Netanyahu or anybody from the government. It clearly is something to behold, isn't it? Yeah,
and it has been that, I think, obviously, as you say, that Hamas will definitely try and encourage people to smile and pose for the camera, but one footage which particularly struck me was there was a woman who was a hostage who was leaving, and she was carrying her small dog. And I thought that was just quite alarming, that after this 2-month period, she still has a dog with her when she is leaving. It's not, I guess, it's a small example, but it's...
Well, I was reading the background to the story of that woman and the child with the dog, that apparently when they were being taken, she asked, can she please take her dog with her, because she is so attached to her dog. And then not only did they return completely unharmed, but the dog was in good shape and everything, and she returned with her beloved friend, which is of course her dog. And again, there are so many of these other stories. The mother that wrote the letter about her child that was being treated like a queen, as she said, the queen of Gaza, and as she says that she will forever be an eternal prison of gratitude, which I thought was such a lovely piece of phrasing in her particular her letter. In terms of where this is all going right now, look, when we talk about a ceasefire, the fear with the ceasefire is, of course, we don't want any of the fighting to continue. But the fear with the ceasefire is there will still be the checkpoints in the West Bank. There will still be the attacks on Masjid al-Aqsa. There will still be the restrictions being placed on Gaza, the water, the electricity, the fuel, etc. It's not fundamentally breaking down what has breathed life into this occupation. How do you see this beginning to wound up?
Yeah, I think very important point, because as South African Jews for a Free Palestine, while we're calling for a ceasefire and we just immediately need that to happen, it's just ridiculous that it hasn't yet. Our long-term goal isn't a ceasefire, it is the total dismantling of Zionism as a political project, and with that, it means from the river to the sea, one equal country. And I think the point to emphasize there is, although this genocide has intensified since October the 7th, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is nothing new. It has been an ongoing project for 75 years, and it's not a random project. It's structural, it's systematic, and you could read the earliest Zionist documents and letters and literature from the earliest 20th century. It did spell out quite clearly that their plan was for a tote from the river to the sea, and perhaps further than that, one Israeli state. So I think that we know once the ceasefire is here, that it's not going to end the gradual or slow ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It's not going to end the lived legacy and the active embodied violence of apartheid. And the only way that could be stopped is if there is a total dismantling of Zionism as a political project and one equal state. So that's what we as SAJFP call for, and it's what we're going to mobilize and put pressure on our government to provide sanctions until we're at that point.
I envy this gentleman's bravery, and I'm sure financially it would have been more beneficial to side on the other side. Your external credibility is precisely your power, regardless of internal motivation. To the dear young man, Jamie, may you be in the protection of the Almighty. I would think it's difficult for Jews to question what they have been brought up to believe in terms of Zionism, and they may then have a conflict and unable to deal with or question who they really are. Jamie, you are brave and in inspiration. God bless. Are you getting any backlash or adverse effects in your areas of work? Asks that question. We spoke about the backlash a bit earlier, but do you find that there are people actively trying to block any sorts of advances? Or
well, in terms of work, like I'm a student now, so I haven't felt things immediately, but I was hoping to, I'm doing my master's, I was hoping to try get a scholarship afterwards to continue my study perhaps in America, where now I'm grappling with the realization that I might not be able to do that and get that opportunity now because of speaking out for humanity. But so yeah, I haven't faced that yet, but obviously when one is speaking out, they have to do so with the knowledge of what could happen and what very well might.
Shalom, Jamie. When we as Muslims post on media platforms, we must make sure that we don't refer to the people of Jewish faith as the ones causing all of these atrocities. However, we do call those that are doing so Zionists. We make sure that people of Jewish faith doesn't get the backlash, and a great job, says that one in there on 0786 10 11 12. Somebody wants to know if we can see a pic of Jamie. Well, are we streaming live? No, we are recording video, so you'll find some of the snippets of it later today, and the full interview will be up on our YouTube page, on the Radio 786's YouTube page. The video of at least this discussion says, so keep look out for that, and we'll post the details to our social media as well. I want to cry when listening to Jamie. May the whole Jewish community start thinking his way. He says this WhatsApp in on 0786 10 11 12. All right, we're going to have to wrap up. Jamie, thanks so very much for coming through. What is it that you'd like to land with people at this time? In terms of what is the necessity right now, and perhaps an encouragement to find one's own moral conscience.
Yeah, and I think also in terms of that moral conscience, it's not just feeling it, it's embodying it and acting on it. And if I'd leave with one message now is, as the December starts, this is naturally the time of the year where everybody will go off, have their holidays, take the much needed time to rest and recuperate, which is fundamentally important. But our brothers and sisters in Palestine aren't going to get that festive period, aren't going to get that opportunity. So I just want to emphasize that from my side, SAJFP are going to continue actively mobilizing this year and up until next, until there is a free Palestine. And the only way we're going to get total boycotts, divestments and sanctions is that as South Africans, as a broad base, if we continue to not ask our government, but make our government do this. So I just encourage people to, I hope to meet many of you at protests, and would encourage people to keep organizing.
Yeah, Jamie's, if you don't see the videos later, he's a tall young man with, is that blonde hair, brown hair?
Some people say red, some say blonde.
Jamie, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so very much for coming through. Jamie Rosengarten, he is from the South African Jews for a Free Palestine.